Alright, let's see what we got here. Um, no actual token generation in this hand. We do have a good amount of action we can draw, though. So let's try keeping it. Um, we've got some interaction, and once we do draw even a single token maker, it should be great because we have double intangible virtue already. Definitely a weird hand, but one I think you probably have to keep and hope to draw a token maker just because we have lands and spells, So we have some removal, we have some enchantments that are going to help us, assuming we draw what our deck wants to be doing. We draw the cards we need to draw, and just going to fetch here for Godless Shrine. It looks like we are up against Infect. So now we can either play this intangible virtue and just take a hit from the Glistener Elf, or another option is we could just go ahead and path this Glistener Elf and hope to sort of disrupt our opponent's Infect threats. And so since we don't have any threats ourselves, I think we just want to go ahead and try to disrupt what our opponent is up to. So the question then becomes, when do we want to use this Path to Exile? And I think we actually want to do it on our opponent's upkeep. The reason for doing this is that our opponent doesn't have that extra land available to them right now. And yes, they can use a spell to save it, like a Vines or an Apostle's Blessing. But those cards are going to be good anyways. So it looks like our opponent's got an Inkmoth Nexus and a Noble Hierarch to follow up here with. That's a pretty solid follow-up. Hopefully we'll be able to surprise our opponent with this Slaughter Pact. That would be nice. But we were going to want to path this turn anyways just to save that 2 points of Infect damage. And it actually looks like we drew a Spectral Procession. We can't actually cast it this turn. So we're just going to play Intangible Virtue. Next turn, though, this Procession should be quite good. Hopefully we don't just die this turn. We have Slaughter Pact, which should be pretty solid, but it looks like our opponent has a lot of pump effects here, so it looks like this is going to be an attack for 4 points of Infect, so we could cast our Slaughter Pact here on this Inkmoth Nexus, or we can just take the hit. That decision is pretty close. So I think we want to just take it, and then we can play our Spectral Procession next turn and make some blocks on the Inkmoth Nexus. So let's go with that. Wow, we actually drew Path to Exile, which is a pretty interesting draw. I think we still want to go ahead and get the Spectral Procession on the table. And our opponent may be incentivized here to try to kill us, because we are tapped out. We do have the Slaughter Pact in hand, though. So we're kind of banking on that to save us in this situation. If our opponent has something like an Apostle's Blessing to try to get through with the Nexus. So it looks like the play is going to be attacking with the Nexus. So now the question becomes, how do we want to block? We can go ahead and chump with one spirit, or we can triple block. I think we actually want to just go ahead and chump with one spirit here, because we want to be able to get in with our intangible virtue on our next turn and have both Path and Slaughter Pact available to us. And we drew Inquisition, so let's go ahead and fire that off, and we'll see exactly what our opponent's got going on here. Oh, it's just a Spell Pierce. Okay, so not a ton to worry about now. We can just go ahead and play our intangible virtue, and we know now what we're up against. So we're up against whatever our opponent draws on their draw step, but other than that, we're in pretty good shape here. We were worried that our opponent had a bunch of pump in hand, and potentially something like Vines of Vastwood to save their Inkmoth Nexus, and that's why I liked the single black last turn, just so we would be safe with both Path and Slaughter Pact still in hand. But now we have 2 3/3 flyers and 2 removal spells, so feeling pretty confident about this. So the question becomes, how do we want to block this Nexus? I think we can essentially pretend to double block and see what our opponent does. So let's do that. We'll kind of go through the motions of double blocking. And we'll see if our opponent plays a pump spell here. That's great news for us. If not, I think we probably still just want to go ahead and use this path anyways. So we'll see what goes on. So it is a Vines of the Vastwood. That's okay though. We're just gonna Slaughter Pact away this Inkmoth Nexus anyways. So that's why I like just going ahead and double blocking and then pathing, because we were going to use that Slaughter Pact either way. But Vines was a good draw from our opponent. So it definitely is going to make things interesting here. And we have to use our turn to pay for this pact. We drew a Shambling Vents, which I like just going ahead and putting into play. We're going to be able to get in there for 6. And so now the question is what is our opponent drawing this turn? And I think we probably have to go ahead and double block with our flyers, even though if our opponent has drawn a pump spell, it's pretty bad for us, but I think we have to do this anyways. So let's see. And it was a Vines that our opponent drew, so that's pretty annoying. Now we kind of have to draw something in addition to what we've already drawn this game. And it's just a Lingering Souls off the top. So, or sorry, an Intangible Virtue off the top, not a Lingering Souls. Lingering Souls is what we wanted to draw. So our opponent drew running copies of Vines of Vastwood here. Somewhat frustrating, definitely. So we're pretty much relying on top decking on our next turn, so we might as well just go ahead and play this Intangible Virtue. We are going to need a removal spell or flying token generation, like a Procession or Lingering Souls, or even a Ghost Quarter would be pretty good here to get rid of this Inkmoth Nexus. There's some... Okay, so we're actually just dead. Our opponent drew Rancor. Pretty frustrating game. Those last few turns were pretty annoying, but let's go on to the sideboard. So in terms of sideboarding, I think we want to just board in more removal and discard. So we can board in like Duresses, Zealous Persecution. I don't think we want Timely Reinforcements here. So Anguished Unmaking is removal. We may want to consider. Disenchant is removal for Inkmoth Nexus. We don't need Aura Champion here, but because we don't really need to worry about our life total. So this type of life gain isn't going to be that important. I actually think Fulminator Mage may be better than Disenchant. They both do similar things. Fulminator can also take your opponent off of colored mana, which can sometimes be nice. So I think our deck is pretty well set up for this matchup, actually. So sometimes there's some annoying artifacts or enchantments other than Inkmoth Nexus, like say Spellskite. Disenchant can get rid of. So I think we just want to board in the copy of Disenchant. Outside of that, this seems pretty reasonable to me. So let's try this out. We are going to get to be on the play, and got a bunch of discard. I think we're going to keep this. Just try to pick our opponent's hand apart, and then land this Sorin. Solemn Visitor. So we'll see what our opponent's got. We're just going to fetch for a Godless Shrine, deal ourselves some damage, and see what's going on with an Inquisition. Our opponent actually boarded in Kitchen Finks. That is interesting for sure. So we probably just want to go after our opponent's threats here. So let's go ahead and start off by taking this Blighted Agent. And then next turn we can cast some more discard. We'll see if our opponent elects to shock themselves with Breeding Pool to hold up Spell Pierce. It looks like they did not want to do that, so let's just continue on with Inquisition. So it looks like our opponent drew another Blighted Agent, so we're just going to have to take that here. And let's just go ahead and play this Windbrisk Heights. Not really a whole lot, actually, we see off the Heights. So let's just go ahead and take a Ghost Quarter. And I like taking Ghost Quarter just because the Inquisition late in the game isn't going to be that effective. And Ghost Quarter could potentially be good against Inkmoth Nexus. It looks like our opponent actually drew yet another Infect threat, which is pretty annoying. So we have this Thoughtseize which we can use. We know the contents of our opponent's hand, so the question becomes, what do we want to take? And I think it's actually the Spell Pierce. Just because we want to get this Sorin into play on our next turn. So let's take the Spell Pierce. And we can just go ahead and cast the Intangible Virtue right now. It's a bit weird our opponent boarded in Kitchen Finks against us. It could end up being good, I'm not sure. If our opponent draws another land here and casts the Finks, it's a little bit annoying. But I think we're still more scared of the Infect damage from this Glistener Elf. Disenchant was not a good draw in this situation. We do care slightly about our life total. Just because we know our opponent has a non-infect threat that they've boarded in. But we're just going to play the Sorin and make a Vampire. The Vampire is a 3/3 right now because of this Intangible Virtue we have in play. So it looks like our opponent drew the third land, which may mean casting Kitchen Finks this turn. Having Vigilance with the Virtue is really nice, though, because we can just bash in and then still have our Vampire back for blocks. It looks like our opponent's actually going for Apostle's Blessing right now. This could be to try to take out our Sorin. It could also be that our opponent wants to deal us 5 Infect. Either way, it's not really that scary for us. It looks like our opponent's just cashing in those cards just to get rid of the Sorin. And we actually drew another source of token generation, so we're just going to go ahead, cast Bitter Blossom, and get in. And now we're pretty far ahead in the game. This Kitchen Finks is essentially going to trade with one of our fairy tokens, most likely. So it's not really that scary. And we drew yet another source of token generation. So now we're actually at the point where we're going to be able to use this Windbrisk Heights on our next turn, most likely. It's not going to be great because we didn't find anything that special off of it, just a Ghost Quarter. But so it looks like our opponent's not even attacking, and we have lethal damage on our turn. Exactly 11, I believe. So yep, just going to go ahead and make this attack. And yep, that's going to be game 3. Okay, so that went much easier for us than game 1. So see if there's anything else we really want to consider here. And I think we probably just want to leave things the way they are. Although we could board out this Disenchant because we didn't really see Spellskite. It's still pretty good against Inkmoth Nexus, so let's just keep this configuration the same. And we'll see. I think this matchup is in the favor of the tokens deck. Our opponent got pretty lucky that game 1 to top deck out of that, and it looks like this hand is okay. So we're gonna keep it. The Zealous Persecution can be quite good. It can also not be that good. It just depends what our opponent's draw looks like. if our opponent has these 1 toughness creatures, like if our opponent goes Glistener Elf into, say, a Blighted Agent, and then we just go ahead on our turn and cast Zealous Persecution, that's a pretty good exchange for us. Also, Noble Hierarch. So, I mean, the Persecution, this is one of the matchups where we specifically have it in our deck for this matchup, and it looks like it's going to be a Glistener Elf, so we are going to be able to get our opponent here with this Zealous Persecution. And we're just going to fetch for a white source, and yep, just going to get those creatures off the board, and that's going to set up Spectre Procession next turn, and our opponent's stuck on 1 land, so it's going to be another Glistener Elf, but at this point, that Glistener Elf isn't that threatening, because now all of a sudden we have these tokens, which are going to be good blockers. We also have Intangible Virtue to buff up these tokens, and a copy of Gideon. So, the question is, what do we want to do on our turn? We can basically do whatever we want. We can play Gideon, we can play Virtue, or we can play Procession. Gideon is the most mana efficient play, so I think I like just doing that here. We can play Gideon and just make a 2/2, and then on our next turn, we can do Spectre Procession plus Intangible Virtue. So I like actually just getting in with 2 spirits here. That way we have 2 blockers back. And that's just to be safe. So if our opponent plays something like a Blighted Agent, that would be the most worrisome play here, but it looks like it's just going to be a Might of Old Kroza. We can just go ahead and chump this with a Knight Ally. There's no reason to take that damage whatsoever. And we actually just drew Intangible Virtue. So we can play double Virtue here. And I think we just go ahead and make an emblem and attack our opponent down to 3. And this should just be the game. I don't really know any sequences our opponent could have here that would be enough to win. So we can just go ahead and block here, but yeah. That's going to be the match.